Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't.
Hi, I'm Ken Adams, and I'm heading up to the Dickson Lookout on the top of Mount Barnabe to talk with Michael Fischer, who's a longtime lookout up there and volunteer. It's going to take me probably about 15 minutes to drive up the road. K6MLF, KM6WYJ, KB6HOH, KM6WYJ. Hey, Steve, just heading up to go meet with Michael.
Okay. Well, you guys have a good time.
Roger that. Thanks a lot, Steve. KB6HOH, KM6WYJ, clear.
Okay, Steve, we're going to try to keep the packet station up and running here. The other ones are going to have to go dark for now anyway. Okay, and Dan, I'll tell you what, if you want...
All right, heading up the last probably 5 minutes or so up to the lookout. Definitely steep and narrow road here. And now the final approach to the lookout. Michael Fischer, welcome to the New School at Commonweal.
Thank you, Ken.
I'm Ken Adams, and I'm an audio video producer for the New School at Commonweal, and I'm normally on that side of the camera. I met you through ham radio and the Dickson Lookout where we are today, and so it was suggested that I take a trip up here and interview you today.
It's an honor.
And thank you very much. This conversation is part of the Building Community Resilience series at the New School at Commonweal. We are in the Dickson Lookout on Mount Barnabe at about 1,480-ish feet.
Yep.
This lookout tower is one of the few remaining lookouts that are operational, operated by volunteers and humans in the country. Is that correct?
Well, it's one of four, and only four in the Bay Area. Two
Okay.
here in Marin, one down in Mount Hamilton, and one up at Pole Mountain in Sonoma County.
This particular lookout was first put in service in 1935?
39.
39, just as kind of like a flat top platform of some sort?
It was a funky wooden flat top building, but
Okay.
it was still a building.
And then I guess was it the mid-60s and the mid-70s that this one was built?
Yeah.
We are looking to the west-southwest, slightly.
That's right.
Behind us is Mount Tamalpais, and there's the Mount Tam Lookout up there as well. What makes the relationship between having these two lookouts in this county kind of unique in terms of being able to spot and locate fires?
Well, as you see, the landscape is very hilly. So if I were to see a smoke behind one of those ridges, I wouldn't know how far behind it is. And all I could say to the dispatcher was, it's in this direction and it's behind such and such a ridge. But with Mount Tam in service, Mount Tam can swing its Osborne firefinder. That's what this machine is. I would look at the smoke, and then I would read the azimuth off of here, report that. Mount Tam would also read the azimuth, and where the two lines cross would determine where the fire is. Even though neither of us could actually see the origin of the smoke, we can pinpoint it by doing the cross bearings, called triangulation.
Triangulation. And that's one of the really cool aspects that actually led me to learning how to be a lookout here,
Yes.
where I am occasionally.
Yes, you are.
I want to go more into some of the specifics of the lookout and the Osborne firefinder in a little bit, but I just wanted to give a little bit of introduction to our viewers and listeners.
Sure.
For you, Mr. Fischer. You have been a volunteer for decades in the service of local organizations and groups that either support or foster community resilience or community histories and traditions. Your background is as an environmental consultant for many years. You did work for the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, the California Coastal Conservancy, Natural Resource Defense Council, Sierra Club, California Coastal Commission, and you have many years as a city planner and environmental consultant. And you've held high positions at some of those places. But what I really love about your resume right now is you are a student, a saunterer, lover of poetry, and music student at Retired for Good.
Retired for good. That's where I am. That's right.
And the funny thing about you is that you've retired and you are doing good stuff for a lot of people.
The pun was not intended.
And you have a lot of other interests as well that just in hobbies that each one of those hobbies, from my perspective, would be like semi-lifelong sort of traditions.
They're all fun.
So I wanted to ask you, just to kind of start off our conversation a little bit, what were you like as a 10-year-old, and what did your world hold in store for you then?
You know, nobody's ever asked me that question. That's a very good one.
You usually don't.
Yeah.
Michael Lerner kind of started that, so I wanted to kind of get that one in there.
10 years old, I'd already been to 6 different grade schools in 3 different states. Started out in first grade in uniform. Before World War II was over, I was at the Gulf Coast Military Academy in Mississippi. So I was growing up in the Jim Crow South. My parents were both from Illinois, and we lived in a black neighborhood in Pass Christian, Mississippi. And so I was called when I went to school, I was called the Inn Lover, because we lived, I played with and was friends with my black neighbors. This just wasn't done in Mississippi in those days. But what those first 10 years taught me was, you used the term, and I never would have thought of it at the time, resilience. I had to be, and I was a shorty.
Yeah.
So I was the new kid in school virtually every year. So on the good side, I learned to stop, look, and listen before I said things.
Okay.
On the bad side, I learned to never make friends. Because if you made friends, then you were going to lose them because you knew you were going to be gone. And so, yes, friends lowercase f, but friends uppercase f, not so much.
And that was dangerous for you.
Yeah. Dangerous in terms of happiness versus unhappiness.
Yeah.
The cost-benefit ratio was skewed on the side of steer clear.
Well, I know when I was a 10-year-old that stuff was some of the most important stuff, like friends and relationship. Yeah. So your dad was military, is that what you said?
He ran the USO offices, serving in the military. He had a heart condition, so he couldn't be in the Army, which during World War II was a source of sadness for him. He wanted to be in the military, but he couldn't be. So this was the second best thing.
But consequently, like many other military families, you moved a lot.
That's right.
And also being in the South, so you lived in African-American neighborhoods, and you had other white folks just really not happy with integrating with them. Wow, I can only imagine. I grew up in Texas in like the late 60s and early 70s, and I can still remember in the small town south where my dad was born, the signs with no colored this and just the implicit otherness that exists to this day in many respects.
Much, much less, but less so. But it was in your face all the time.
Yeah. So I can appreciate the perspective you have of coming from there, and especially those times. Yeah. So thank you. Were there any specific moments that you can remember early on that led you on the pathway towards a career path filled with the efforts to protect our environment and natural resources?
Not at age 10. No.
Well, I mean, kind of like in your earlier years. I mean, like as you progressed on to...
Well, outside of San Antonio, where we spent the high school years, there's a little town of Helotes, Helotes. And it was a scrubby town, but it was mostly wild, mostly open space. It was not urban at all. As our family would take a drive, say, out to Grand Canyon, we'd say, oh, look, just like Helotes. Really saying, this natural world is different from the urban world. And do we like it? Yeah, we do. So it was when we were 19, we moved to California, where we have stayed since. Dad got a job at Santa Clara University at a time when Silicon Valley, that word was never thought of. Santa Clara Valley was known, and we literally known and spoken of as the Valley of Heart's Delight. And so we found ourselves, there are mountains on each side of this valley. No mountains in Mississippi or Texas. Pretty rare. Yeah, your mountains in Texas ought to be in New Mexico. You mean the mountains over near El Paso?
And there's some small scrubby hills around San Antonio and Austin.
The hill country, yes. Yeah. Nothing like Mount Hamilton.
Yeah.
So anyway, we were wowed by that. And then I opened up the encyclopedia to a photograph of Yosemite. Wow. So the family got in the car and we went to Yosemite for the day. And we found ourselves doing that regularly. But the first trip to Yosemite was just mind-blowing. That together with the carpet of orchards in the Santa Clara Valley was just a beautiful place to be. And at that same time, out comes the Sierra Club with its first big picture book. Ansel Adams and David Brower. And at 19, I took that book to the college counselor at Foothill Junior College in Mountain View. And I said, this is what I'd like to do. Had no idea about the word environment or sustainability or conservation. And she took the book home and came back the next week and said, well, I tell you what, you ought to think about city planning. Get a degree in city planning and get your degree in political science first. So I did.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. I got my bachelor's in poli-sci and got a master's from Berkeley in city planning. And city planning really is, if practiced well, is a profession of inclusion, of holistic approach. You're not only looking short term, but you're looking to the future. And indeed, you're serving the future. But you're looking at social issues, economic issues, traffic issues, housing issues, and trying to pull all of that together. And so city planning is a wonderful entrance into the field of environmentalism.
So, Michael, what does resilience mean to you personally, and how do you see the work you're now involved with contributing towards fostering resilience in our local communities?
Well, resilience sounds to me like a buzzword.
It's an air quote word these days.
Right. Yeah. It's not something around which I've kind of built an intellectual construct. But resilience can mean, to me, a practice that is sustainable, a practice that serves the different communities, animal, spiritual, human, in a way that allows each of them to flourish and allows them to respond to challenges, whether they're fires or floods or heat waves or bombings in Lebanon, whatever those terrible things are that jar a society. How do you build a society that, in fact, can take those hits and still find peace, love, health, happiness?
Michael Lerner oftentimes uses the word polycrisis, to describe the set of different, equally occurring circumstances, culture shocks, natural events, all these different possibilities that are happening simultaneously.
Think of the kids in grade school who have to be trained to how to deal with active shooters.
I have a 15-year-old in high school.
Yeah.
And we're lucky where we live. We generally don't think of it, but there's no reason why it couldn't happen.
Well, even if there's no reason that it might happen, she or he's now been trained to worry about it.
Right. And to pretend he's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where I worry personally as a dad.
In my grade school, it was nuclear attack in the 1950s. The nuns would try to train us, okay, close the window toward the blast and open the windows away from the blast and get under your desk. Well, by the time you think of where the blast was, you're toast. Again, the kids had to go through this and trigger their fear mechanism.
Yeah. I do remember that as, first, second grade, it was either that or tornadoes in Dallas.
Yeah.
It was a terrifying thing. I guess eventually I had developed coping mechanisms or denial mechanisms or whatever.
Well, you mentioned earlier, Ken, you learn to face life with a smile.
Yeah.
And that actually is a learned skill. It's not learned individually. You have to watch somebody else, like your parents or your friends, approaching every day with a smile. And the smile implies hopefulness, implies empathy, implies warmth. There are a lot of people who can't do that.
Yeah. It is a quick and easy mechanism I've learned, like in performing and just in general, of inspiring a little hit of gratefulness. Because I think physiologically, when you smile, it releases a little bit of pitocin or dopamine, whatever the hormone is, that just gives you a little bit of a slight release from whatever might be troubling you.
Indeed, radio announcers are trained to speak with a smile.
Right.
Even if their lives are falling to pieces outside the studio, if you speak with a smile, it shows.
It comes across.
It does come across. It comes across in a circle.
Yeah. So what does resilience mean to you personally, and how do you see the work you're now involved with contributing towards fostering resilience in our local communities?
Well, we did talk about what resilience means, but how do I see it? Again, I don't really think resilience is what I'm doing, helping resilience. But yes, my volunteer activity in the Community Emergency Response Team, CERT, is focused on, all right, how does this community protect itself from hazardous events and rebound after those events? And most of my work with CERT has been in communications. Communications being an essential link between people. Here we go. Between people in need and people who can provide that need. You don't have the communication, the needs are not met. So most of my work in CERT and in the ham radio community is focused on providing the communications that serve the served agency, the fire departments, and to serve the neighborhoods who might need those support resources.
We've decided to leave the Marin County Fire Department radio on, partly because Michael is actually on duty right now, and we might actually get a call to look around and spot any potential smoke situation that might be reported. So we're going to leave that in.
And since part of my job is to report that smoke, you'll see my head swiveling every now and then during the interview.
And you'll also see my head swiveling towards my little technical rig, just making sure that we're getting what we think we're getting. Let's talk about mentoring, because I consider you a mentor and kind of a model of a type of spiritual awareness and practice that's kind of that you bring to your everyday life. And there's kind of a quiet humbleness and inspiring aspect. I've actually noticed it while we've been doing this conversation, and it touches me in a very...
Same to you, Phil.
Yeah.
You've got it.
Well, so the little bits of time that I've spent with you have just been, you're the type of person that just we drop in to a place where we're
Comfortable.
there. Comfortable. Yep. And so I think that type of mentorship along with teaching people about the nuts and bolts of an activity or something, is really important. And is there anything that you'd like to say about maybe any mentors of your own that have helped inspire you along the way? Any stories that...
Sure, I can tell a story that was really very helpful and influential to my life career, actually. It was when I was the freshman in high school, and my buds played the clarinet in the band. So I wanted to play the clarinet in the dance band as well. So here I was, freshman, first couple of weeks, trying to play the clarinet. And Brother Schaefer, this is a Catholic high school in San Antonio, Brother Schaefer, after the first week, after me coming in on his upbeat instead of his downbeat, he walked over to me and he said, "Mike, we need an announcer." Instead of saying, "Mike, you're not going to be a good band member," he said, "No, you're a member of our band. We need an announcer." So for the 4 years I was in high school, I was the guy at the mic. For the first 6 months, scared to death being at the mic. And Brother Schaefer would stay up late at night and type out 3x5 cards for me to nervously read to the whatever the school assembly was, or the halftime football game, or band concerts. But after that 6 months, he didn't need to write them anymore. I didn't have to read. I was able to extemporize. And that skill then allowed me to succeed in many of the jobs that I undertook, whether it was testifying before the U.S. Senate, or giving an interview, or giving a speech, to having a general staff meeting. So the ability to speak without being all stressed about it was something that Brother Schaefer gave me. And I don't know that he ever thought of the word mentor. He was just being a good teacher.
Well, he saw you in many respects.
Yeah. Well, and that, again, is the answer that I would give to your question. How do you become a good mentor? We mentioned earlier the skill of finding yourself in a new situation or meeting a new person for the first time. Stop, look, and listen. The fancy word, of course, is empathy, which is tinged with respect and appreciation for who the person might be. I've literally never thought of myself as a mentor, but as a person who could be a partner in whatever that person wanted to do. And of course, my greatest pride in mentorship is with my kids and grandkids. Christy, our daughter, is an environmental leader now at the Trust for Public Land and formerly at the Nature Conservancy and a number of other jobs. Early in her career, they would look at her and say, "You're Michael Fischer's daughter?"
Mm-hmm.
Well, about 12 or 15 years ago, that pinnacle was crossed, and now it's people look at me and say, "You're Christy Fischer's dad?" Now, oh man, does that make you proud?
I bet
yes.
it does. Yeah.
That's the level of mentorship that really means something to me. Have I met other mentors along the way? Absolutely. In my early career, after I took the advice of that guidance counselor and started out as an entry-level planner, the planning director for the city of Mountain View, Bob Lawrence, took me under his wing. When I got my master's degree and went to work in San Francisco for a civic organization called Spur, again, my boss took me under his wing and helped me out. In philanthropy, when I landed later in my career as a funder, it was John Evans who took me under her wing.
Commonweal friend, longtime friend, board member, participant, and new school host.
And just flat out lovely person.
Yes.
She and my wife, of course, who also had been working at the San Francisco Foundation in philanthropy, John and Jane, basically taught me the ropes, and I owe them a debt of gratitude.
I want to talk about philanthropy since you brought it up and how it relates to modern, we're using resilience kind of more in an air quotes sort of manner in this
Right.
conversation. How do you see the intersection of philanthropy and emergency response? And what's the role of private individuals and organizations in building resilient communities as you see it?
Most foundations provide support to organizations that government either can't or won't provide, and they see themselves as kind of a safety net below the government responsibilities. And most foundations see emergency response as a government function. And indeed, there were several proposals just in the last year to the Marin Community Foundation for emergency response support, and they were turned down for that very reason. So I'll turn your question around. Philanthropy as support to sustainable communities or to resilience in communities, absolutely. And those foundation grants go largely to people, organizations seeking to provide affordable housing, seeking to provide new starts in jobs. There's one organization that jumps to mind called Dress for Success. Homeless people who don't have a house with a closet with clothes that are going to get them into a job interview. Dress for Success provides clothing that allows the person to be seen as a respectable, professional person worthy of the job seeker, job giver's attention.
Because like if any of us who spend a night on the street without a shower and stuff, we are not going to be able to look so presentable for a job interview.
That's what Dress for Success is about. So that's an example of the kind of program that foundations would be excited to provide. Another part of a sustainable community, a resilient community, is the vitality of the arts program in that community, whether it's the ballet or the opera or the symphony or just the youth band. The spiritual dimension of the artistic dimension of a community and of an individual is, I would argue, just as important as their physical. Now, of course, you got to eat before you can play the violin.
Right.
But if you haven't been exposed to the violin, even before you're able to eat, you're not going to necessarily want to play it once you've started eating again. So the vitality of the arts community in any town is a significant part of that community's resilience. And finally, I think philanthropy done well seeks to support societal change as it responds to different, what does Michael Lerner call it?
He calls it the polycrisis.
The polycrisis. Well, there are mini and maxi polycrises,
Right.
And individuals and communities might experience a mini polycrisis. But a foundation is going to want to provide support that looks beyond those crises. What is it that you want in your community in the West? My program at the Hewlett Foundation was environmental in the West, the tri-national North American West, Mexico, Canada, and the United States. All right, there are a whole lot of communities in the West that used to be dependent upon clear cutting. Forests are gone.
Right.
What's that community do now? Or the forests are still there, but we ought to leave those forests there for other parts of the community that need their own resilience. Spotted owls, for instance.
And there's socioeconomic and political issues that are arising because of that.
That's
have arisen,
correct.
yeah.
So how does the Hewlett Foundation provide support to Elko, Nevada, who's got people whose grandfathers were miners or clear cutters? And so that kind of foundation support, again, requires an open mind and a big smile when you're talking to people who think that environmentalists are satanic.
Right.
And the environmentalists think that these clear cutters are satanic. Wait a minute. We're all human beings. We all have needs. How does the foundation provide common ground for those folks to get together and to negotiate and look for how is what we're doing going to serve our grandkids and our great-grandkids? That becomes the common dimension of sustainability or resilience. Where is your focus? Is it on the short term or is it on the grandkids?
I guess in a lot of situations, if you're really thinking about it, it has to be kind of both.
It has to be both. That's right. This generation has to eat in order to have grandkids.
So let's talk about radio. I first met you on the radio. I became a ham operator, I guess, about 6 years ago.
And what's your call sign?
I am KM6WYJ.
WYJ.
Kilo Mike 6 Whiskey Yankee Juliet. And I first met Mr. K6MLF. I was a new amateur radio licensee, and I became licensed because I live over in Woodacre, and the trees are oftentimes coming down in the winter and knocking out our power drops, and we had telephone lines. We were going to have more fire shutoffs and stuff like that, and I just figured it was a good idea, and I ended up, right after I became licensed, I was able to actually use the ham radio to call out when a tree took down a power drop middle of the night. I got in, I just tried to get anybody to respond, and I found a guy who happened to be a sheriff also. And I think we might know who the same person is.
No, I don't.
There's a sheriff who at that time was patrolling, and he happened to be an amateur radio operator. And I got him, and he called the fire department, who came out and cleared the tree. And so I got involved with the Marin Amateur Radio Society, and I met Mr. Michael Fischer and some other really helpful folks who would pretty much drop everything and help you figure out a technical thing with ham radio.
And ham radio talk, that's being an Elmer.
An Elmer.
You found a number of Elmers, and you found that quite a large percentage of ham radio operators want to be Elmers.
Well, we tend to be kind of techie, sort of nerdish sort of guys. We don't really do it for the dates and the ladies.
Right.
But Michael, you were definitely a established member of the Marin Amateur Radio Society out of Mill Valley, known as MARS. But when did you first start learning about radio in terms of, that we would think about it in terms of amateur radio and the technical possibilities?
Well, the truth is, when I was probably 8 or 9, living in, at that time in Gulfport, Mississippi, the guy who lived just 2 doors away, he had his radio shack in an old tar paper shack right next to the railroad tracks. And I would go in there and see the flickering oscilloscopes and smell the ozone of the old tubes and look at the cards that he had gotten from around the world of all of his contacts and listen to him, mostly Morse code, but some voice. And I just saw, here's this little kid in the little town on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi in the 40s, seeing this guy from this tar paper shack reaching out to the world. And my eyes got really big. Just so maybe 5 years or so later, maybe in my early teens, there was another guy who lived just down the block and had a radio shack, and and just the equipment. Like your equipment here is really sexy.
Right.
I really thought that these radio things were big honking things with big glowing tubes.
Oh, yeah.
I just thought that was really pretty special. And I'm actually not sure why I got my ham radio license
I think you just kind of described why.
Yeah, probably. So. well, it was like 15 years ago since I've been licensed. 7 for you, something like that.
Something like that.
There are so many different facets to ham radio. It's the long distance stuff called DX.
Okay.
It's the Morse code stuff called CW, continuous wave. It's contesting. It's bouncing a signal off the moon and going to different distant countries. Or it's talking to the International Space Station, or bouncing your signal off of some of the satellites. Or it's providing emergency communication support for neighborhood groups and the fire department. Even in that situation, are you providing very local communication support, or are you trying to connect the Mill Valley Emergency Response Center to the Governor's Office of Emergency Response in Sacramento? I think at first it was those called QSL cards. So you get on and you say CQ, CQ, CQ. This is K6MLF calling CQ, CQ. At CQ and meaning I'm seeking you. Anybody out there? I want you to respond. And so for several years I did that one. So I have many postcards from many different countries, mainly in the Western Hemisphere, but also in Asia and Europe. And that's an exciting part of communication. And indeed, that kind of ham radio experience is directly applicable to the short-term stuff. Because in order to be a good long-range ham radio operator, you've got to be able to pick weak signals out of the hash of the static. Or if you're in a contest and you're calling CQ, you want other people to contact you, it's quite possible that you'll have 30 people all at once trying to get you. So now how do you distinguish among those 30, which one do you the YL, come back. YL, that's young lady. If any of the guys then come back, you say, sorry, only the YL.
Okay.
And then the YL would come back with her call sign and we'd be able to make a contact. Then I'd say, okay, QRZ, which means who's calling. And now I got 20 people calling. And so I'll listen for I copy station ending in Romeo Zulu. Romeo Zulu, come back. And so you're trying to filter out so that you can make a lot of contacts. But you're not going to just turn off the radio because all you hear is a bazillion different voices. So now with that skill learned in an emergency situation, you've got neighborhood response volunteers who are at their wits' end. Yeah. They're in a panic situation. There's all sorts of noise behind them. And so how do you, as the radio communicator, tease out of their panic voice with all sorts of other noise? How do you tease out the essential message and then be able to deliver that to the fire department so that they can respond?
And that requires a bit of net control and direction and calming them down and empathy.
Yep.
And persistence.
And it is a learned skill of being able to tease out. You might hear 5 syllables of a 10-syllable sentence, and so then your brain has to put it together. That's a learned skill. It is a skill you can learn. But if you haven't practiced it, you ain't got it. But you're also absolutely correct. An essential ingredient in successful emergency communication is to stay calm. And in order to sound calm, you've got to be calm. That too is a learned skill.
Yeah.
It can be learned.
So what you're saying is it actually means a lot to actually go through the training enough to get a license, and that just buying a radio on Amazon and having it in your drawer and turning it on when something happens is just not really going to help you very much. And
it's not. It might, in the end, help you by getting somebody to pay attention to you, but it isn't going to help the community very much One of the examples that's been used is a guy on the ham radio saying in the earthquake down in Santa Cruz a few years ago. It's on the radio saying, "The water in my swimming pool is sloshing back and forth." Nobody needed to know that, but it was so dramatically important to him that he needed to say it.
Right.
And by him saying it, he was taking up the airwaves that somebody else with a higher need might have. So what we hope to avoid is what are called USOs, untrained or unexperienced spontaneous operators.
Right.
So pulling your radio out from the bottom of your closet and you haven't been on the radio in the last couple of years, you don't know who else is on the radio, you don't recognize their call signs or their voices, you're not going to be very helpful if when you come on with your call sign, it's not recognized.
Well, that brings up one of my frustrations as a fairly new operator, but having gone through the steps of at least getting to general, is I try to talk to other folks who are interested in using the radios for emergency communication, and they say, "Well, you can use it in an emergency." It's because it's not legal technically to use the radio unless you have a ham operator's license.
Right.
But it is technically legal to use them in an emergency.
Yep, that's right.
And so many people just don't get everything that you just talked about in terms of all the reasons why it's important to become licensed or inexperienced, and you don't have to make a lifetime out of it.
A USO is a bad word.
Yeah.
Yes.
No,
we
it
don't
can
want
totally
unlicensed,
change everything.
untrained, unexperienced, undrilled, unknown. We don't want those.
Is there any fix to that problem of trying to get more people kind of who are genuinely interested in these type of things, who are in the resilience community and that type of thing, who say, "Well, I'm gonna get it one day, and I'm gonna study," and
Well, here's an example. In Mill Valley, there are 150 licensed radio operators. I knew until a couple of years ago, maybe 5. And so I drafted a letter for the fire chief to send to all 150 licensed operators in Mill Valley, saying we're looking to put together a team that will provide the bridge between CERTs and neighborhood response groups and the fire department, and potentially between the fire department and the county's Office of Emergency Management. Would you join this team? 15 people said yes. 10% response. I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah.
So we now have a team. It's grown a bit. We have a team of 20 people that I convened. The city invested in 3 radio stations. So we've got a radio station at the Liberty Ship Southern Marin Fire District headquarters. We've got a radio station that serves the CERTs and NRGs, and we've got a radio station in a trailer behind our Mill Valley headquarters that will talk to the Office of Emergency Management. We drill twice a year in person and twice a year on Zoom. And so these guys and gals didn't know each other. And of this group of 20, there are now 7 of them who've discovered close friendships. And we meet every Friday for lunch. 3 of them are doctors, 2 of them are lawyers. And I'd say the age range is from 30 to 60. So this is an answer to your question. How do we get more people involved? Ask.
These were licensed operators already.
These are all licensed operators.
And so they've already at least made enough commitment to do that. I mean, it took me basically 15 minutes with my cup of coffee in the morning going through an app, studying the test. It wasn't rocket science, to get the license. The frustration I have, and maybe it's just there's not an answer, is the people who are legitimately involved in emergency response and in community resilience and that type of thing, who say they're interested, who also say, "Well, we can always use the radio in an emergency." Have you had any?
Oh yeah, who are you going to talk to?
I know what channel. I know it's. We can talk about the reasons why that's not a good idea.
Yeah.
But have you had any success with moving the needle with some of those folks?
No.
Okay.
No.
Fair enough.
I start when they've got their license. And in this situation, the people that I'm talking about have had their license for decades.
Yeah.
Had just never been asked to get engaged in emergency communication. And some of them just had kind of renewed it every 10 years, but hadn't done anything. And now this group of 6 who meet every day, every first Friday, they've all bought new gear. They've all helped each other put antennas up. So it's a big deal for them. But for the folks who are rogues or who are unabashedly USOs, sorry.
Good luck to us all.
Yeah.
Michael, can you recall a time when ham radio made a significant difference in a critical situation for you?
Well, you named one that was local and important to you. The most important or most consequential events that I know about are hurricanes and tornadoes. I can't name one in California in the last few years. New Orleans, Florida, and the Tornado Alley routinely makes use of ham radio to supplement the communications of their sheriff's department and their fire departments.
As we have this conversation, there has just been Hurricane Helene that has just wreaked devastation on western North Carolina and that area.
That whole corridor from Florida all the way
up.
For 1559, 1566, mutual aid out of county assignment in Concord. I see Montecito, local tone 1, CDS TAC 2.
Well, see, there's sustainability, regional sustainability. Marin firefighters being directed to go over to Concord to help them fight a fire.
Yeah. Are you aware of any local traffic ham radio wise that's been involved with any of the
I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not.
Not that you necessarily would be, but there are people with different
But in the situation like you just mentioned, tornadoes and the hurricanes, they knock out electricity for weeks, if not months in some cases. And much of the infrastructure that the local sheriffs might have erected. When you take your shots outside here, Dickson, you'll see all sorts of antennas. And this is the base, the communication base for the National Park Service, for the Coast Guard, and even for the Secret Service. They've all got radios downstairs and antennas upstairs. But one really heavy wind could knock this whole thing down. All of the antennas could come down. And what's going to stay up? Well, many of the ham radio repeaters that we have are going to stay up.
Yeah.
And certainly the point-to-point radios that we have will stay up. And to the extent that we have built personal relationships with the fire department and the sheriff's department, at those times they're going to call us up and say, we need your help.
So speaking of like relationships with the sheriff's department, with the Marin County Fire Department, and local radio groups, and that interface with like CERTs, community emergency response teams. You're involved in your local Mill Valley CERT.
Yep.
In your experience, what role do the neighborhood CERTs play in the broader emergency response ecosystem?
Well, the interesting thing is that in Mill Valley neighborhoods, well, throughout Mill Valley, there have been somewhat close to 500 CERTs trained. And this is not an easy training. This is 40 hours worth of training how to do basic first aid, how to do search and rescue, how to do triage, how to do extrication from collapsed buildings of injured people. That's how to run an emergency shelter. So the training is relatively extensive. But of the 500 or so, when we have a citywide CERT drill, 30 people will come. Mm-hmm. So we figure somewhere in the 10 to 15% are going to be long-time engaged community emergency response team members. The rest are called catch and release.
15, 16.
And the good news is they'll be far better positioned to help their home and their immediate neighbors. And if they can do that in that small neighborhood, cool. That means that the active CERT teams don't need to go do that. It also means that there aren't enough people to actually be neighborhood response leaders.
Right.
And so in Mill Valley and in Corte Madera, in the central and southern Marin, neighborhood response groups have been formed. These are people who have not had the 40 hours of training. They have block captains, each of whom is responsible for 12 and no more houses.
Okay.
And each house has been trained to put up a sign on their front window after a drill or an event says we're okay or help needed.
Okay.
And so the block captain then quickly cruises her or his 12 people, and then using the walkie-talkie, not a ham radio, using the walkie-talkie, calls down to the NRG command post and says, no problems
Neighborhood
here.
readiness group leader.
Yeah, neighborhood response group. Right?
Okay.
And then the neighborhood response groups, if they can't solve a problem, they will turn to the CERT teams. And hopefully there's a CERT person at least in each neighborhood response group command post. If the CERT teams can't handle the situation, then they'll call it down to the citywide CERT command post. The radio for that, we ham radio operators will be managing. So that's a long way of saying there just are not enough people. Even once you get them trained, there are not enough people who are going to be able to deploy. And frankly, this guy, I'm 84, my wife is 80, my wife has said to me, in an emergency, you do not deploy.
No.
You're going to stick with me.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what 90% of the trained certs do. They're going to stick with home.
Right.
And makes all sorts of sense. But I'm not going to be at the command post where I've been training these guys to be.
Right. No, I understand. I think from my own experience, I am somewhat of a fair weather ham radio operator. I mean, I have spurts in which I become more involved.
Sure.
And then I get involved in my life and all that, and then I withdraw from it, but hopefully not completely, but so it's the same. I'm the radio lead for the San Geronimo Valley Emergency Readiness Group here in the San Geronimo Valley, and we have a much...
Do it.
We have we drill every Saturday, and I try to keep our repeater running, and I try to do what I can. But it's a much more loosely affiliated group of folks who we all meet, Saturday mornings. We do try to do some drills, and the organization itself keeps trying. And I think what I just heard you say was like there's a lot more organization between the certs of actually certified people who've gone through the training, block captains who specifically are no more than 12 houses and who have the signs and say those are all things that we would like to do, but at least I know that there's probably about 6 or 7 people in Woodacre where I'm kind of like the neighborhood leader,
right?
And because we've done it in power outages and storms and like that, and I can get in touch with, and I can also get in touch through our local repeater to other villages. And so for me, everything about resilience is like you try to do a little bit of what you can. Because what for me was a little bit overwhelming when I first started into this is like, oh my God, the more I look at emergency preparedness, the more I realize we're just not prepared, hardly at all. Right. That can be daunting.
Yes. And therefore, the solution is do what you can.
Yeah.
Do what you can.
Because doing something feels better than doing nothing.
It might not be enough when you find the disaster falling down on your head, but it's at least better than nothing.
Yeah. Which leads us to the topic of remaining hopeful.
Yes, indeed.
For me, I have my own moments where, things seem pretty hopeless. And on a macro level and sometimes on a personal level. No, usually when it's on a personal level, I'm overinflating the problems. But it's true. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of people are just, especially since the pandemic and everything, a lot of people are really just hurting on lots of different levels, and so, how do you remain hopeful? What is hope to you?
I try not to sound trite, but back in the beginning of the conversation, you talked about approaching each day with a smile. And a smile does imply hope. Even in hopeless situations. Are we in a hopeless situation with climate change? Well, not for this generation or our kids' generation or our grandkids, but our great-grandkids, what are they going to be facing? I was talking to the resilience manager for the city of Miami not so long ago, a good friend. And Jim, I said, so what's the future for Miami? He said, we can save it for our kids, not our grandkids. So what keeps you on this job? Saving it for our kids. So in essence, he's doing what he can.
Yeah.
And the person who loses all hope and says, oh shit, it's too much. None of us can make a difference. That person is not going to be very helpful to a community that needs help. That person's not going to be very helpful to herself if she wants an enjoyable, healthy, happy life. So a person who doesn't have hope is not going to be very helpful to her community or to herself. It's not a matter of how do you sustain hope in a situation with climate change, with the election, with violence, with homeless, with this crazy gulf between wealth and poverty. It's not how you retain health, but the fact that you must be hopeful in order to be healthy. You must be hopeful in order to be helpful. And it's got to well up from inside. It can't be infused from outside. If it means psychiatric counseling and assistance, find a way of getting that hope because you got to have it.
Well, I know for me, and sometimes I have to allow myself to lose hope. Just
to lose hope.
To just like, sometimes I just have to just let the feelings I have just express themselves inside me. Just I have to have the moment of darkness.
Okay.
And if I have it just the way I'm wired, I can get it out, I can express it, and, then the sun will come out tomorrow.
Okay, I've recognized it.
There it is. It's part of me. And it's going to come back.
Evil is there. Yes, evil does exist.
Yeah, and it exists within me, and it exists within others. And
right. But I guess the other word that I would use is another word for hope is love.
Yeah.
If you got love, you really need to have hope.
Yeah.
And the love of grandkids, the love of kids is hope inspiring. It's a circle. And all of us need love. All of us are capable of loving.
And that kind of weaves a little bit of the idea of Zen practice, perhaps, into it. I know I am a student of, not an avid student these days, but I've been a long-term person in the sobriety community. And I've worked with 12 Steps, and I've worked with that. And my best sponsor really helped me. He aligned a lot of the 12 Steps with Zen practice. One 24-hour period at a time. Sometimes you have to break it down into one 10-second period to deal with whatever is going on. and accept what you cannot change or whatever. And what clicked for me, and I'm not a official or I'm not a studied Zen practitioner.
Neither am I.
But I kind of lean in that general direction, is being more present. The more present I am, the better I can deal with stuff. The more present I am, the better I can have love for myself and others. The more present I am, the more creative I can be, etc. The more present I am, the more resilient I can be. So how has your own practice of whatever level you'd like to identify it as helped with you?
Well, I once heard a couple of folks talking at the Upaya Zen Center in Santa Fe, where I've gone 3 times and will go again. I heard them say in a pejorative way, "Oh, he's not Buddhist, he's Buddhish." And I said to myself, that's me. I'm Buddhish. But you're absolutely right. It's being present in the moment. And if that takes, one of our practices is Zazen. Some people call it the silent wall staring exercise. It's the being present by breathing in and breathing out. And if you pay attention to breathing, bringing your breath all the way down, and then pay attention to how your breath goes out again, it's tough to think about anything else. I learned not so long ago that before they go into action, the special forces guys, the big mean guys in the Marines, do what they call square breathing. They breathe in, count to 5, breathe out.
Box breathing. Yeah.
Box breathing, count to 5. That's pretty Buddhish.
That's pretty Buddhish.
And what it is being in the moment and reveling with gratitude at having this moment. And then the second part of it is understanding the unity of everything. There's not a whole lot of difference between you and me.
Right.
When you look at things in a cosmic perspective. And so that too is very Buddhist, to see us all as, to see all of this. The wasps that are trying to get in, they're all part of, they're all stardust.
Yeah.
They're all part of the same process. We're part of it. And so to feel integrated into that fabric of this beautiful blue tiny segment of the cosmos called Earth. So breathing in, breathing out, and realizing the shared brotherhood, the unity of all beings. Makes being angry at another person for being insulting toward you, makes being angry pretty tough.
Yeah.
Why am I doing that?
Yeah.
So I don't know if this helps at all. But
Oh, I think it does. And for me, it's the little technical practices like you just talked about, the box breathing. My same Buddhist sponsor guy, he taught me a trick that I use when I go before a performance, when I'm about to go on stage or whatever. And my active internal dialogue in mind starts hitting me with, this is the time you're really gonna mess up. You've done just fine before, but this is the time you're just really gonna fall flat. So what he taught me to do is with the periphery, is like you look straight ahead and you start noticing everything as much as you can and just being with it on the periphery of your vision and just holding that space and just moving inward and just recognizing as much as you can in the periphery of your vision as you can at that time, and breathing. And if you're doing that, your attention is on that, and you're just kind of forced into the now. The chattering mind of all the crap, is kind of put off to the side, and then you can just kind of go in and do whatever. So I guess for me, it's like the more people can have little practical tips of how to get to these places, it seems like those were the steps that helped me, because I love thinking about grandiose spirituality and cosmic things like that. But I was very much in pain for many, many years before I realized that there's just a daily, moment by moment practice that brings us here where the real magic is.
Yeah. Well said. Well put. There's a lovely book that David Hinton wrote maybe 3 or 4 years ago called Existence, a Story.
Okay.
And it takes an old Chinese painting and it puts you into that painting and talks about the meaning of existence through that. That's a very lovely, well-written, short book about who the hell we are, why we're here.
Well, as we look around here,
No smoke.
no
Good.
smoke today. We're almost to October 1st. We're definitely in fire season, and we're grateful that we've been able to shoot this little conversation. There's a lot of other things that you're interested in, and that, you've built a harpsichord, you've built a clavichord. Did you, like, from scratch?
From kids.
From kids, okay.
Yes.
And you've been an avid sailor.
Yes.
For a lot,
yes.
like model boats.
Model
And-
boats, but before
but also
big boat racing,
here in the Bay.
Yes.
If I know, just from my own experience, about 20 years ago, I had about 4 or 5 years where a friend of mine had a boat in Sausalito, and he pretty much lived on it. And we were sailing all the time. And he was on a race committee, and I learned that, especially by going out in the open ocean down to Santa Cruz on a trip, that will teach you resilience.
Indeed.
The San Francisco Bay is a mother of a place to learn how to sail.
Especially in the summertime. Yeah.
And anything can happen, and often does.
Yeah.
Just on a regular day out. I just know from just a little bit that I did in those years that must have probably helped a little bit towards
did.
resilience.
And the first race out to the Farallon Islands and back in the fog, halfway out, the lee shrouds to the main mast fell down. Luckily, it was the lee shrouds, not the windward shrouds. But everything.
And the shrouds are what hold the mast up, right?
That's right.
Just for people who don't necessarily know what the shroud is.
Sails and then had to rig a new set of. And by the time we had done that, we had no idea where we were. We were deep in fog. This is probably 1970, something like that. So.
Wow.
No radar, anything. We finally found out where we were when we could hear the surf off Ocean Beach. And
that's scary because then you're kind of close. You're too
yes,
close.
the waves were driving us that direction.
Wow. Well, Michael, I really appreciate this conversation.
Thank you,
I
Tim.
mean, there's so many other cool things I could bring up right now, but is there anything that you feel like we haven't touched on? Or
No, you're a wonderful mentor yourself.
Oh.
Your direct eye contact, your smile, your empathy, your understanding of the role that you can play for Commonwealth, it's estimable, sir. So
thank
thank
you.
you. It's
Thank you, Michael.
a pleasure to spend some time with you.
Pleasure to have you as one of my mentors in this. this
Buds.
Buds. We're bros. We're radio bros. We're resilience bros.
Right.
Michael Fischer, thank you for being with us at the New School at Commonweal.
Thank you. My honor.
So which direction are you looking now, Michael?
Looking out toward Black Mountain to the northwest. And beyond Black Mountain is Jenner Ridge that meets the ocean at Russian River. The wind shifted earlier today. It was it was an offshore breeze. It was very windy and very hot. And now it's an onshore breeze. So it's clearing much of that schmutz out of the air.
Many days I'm here about 5 o'clock. The
fog comes
just starts
roaring
coming
in.
Roaring right in.
It can be very, very impressive to see that wall of fog roaring toward you. This blue antenna right here is part of bat research. There are hairy Mexican bats in Sam Taylor State Park that have been banded with little transmitters. And so this radio keeps track of the migration patterns of the hairy Mexican bat.
The hairy Mexican bat.
Who knew?
Marin County Station, stand by for a fire weather update. Marin with current dispatch level for the coast area. Dispatch level is high with BI at the 90th percentile, IC at 52, and ERC at the 90th percentile.
She was saying the burn index, the ERC, the energy release component, and the, I'm forgetting the third, were all at high levels. So this is fire season. This is toward the most risky end of the fire season.
Here we are, volunteers. Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome, Ken.
All right, the day is over. Heading back down the hill from Mount Barnabe Fire Lookout. Quite the little road. Beautiful, beautiful scenery. I know. Watch the road, Ken.
Don't take it, don't. 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 Don't take